Yo guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel, or welcome if you've never been here before. So today I've just jumped on to do my weekly forecast, and this will be the weekly forecast for the week commencing the 14th of February and ending the 18th of February. So before I jump into it, I do just want to draw your guys' attention to the written version of this forecast. So this will be linked in the description, and if you guys want to check out the written version of this forecast, then just click the link in the description. Also guys, before we get started, if you do appreciate the written version of this forecast or you enjoy the video version, then please do subscribe to the channel because I really appreciate that and it helps me out quite a bit. Alright guys, so let's get started. So first thing this week, I'm going to be looking at the Nzd Usd. Alright, so Nzd Usd is pretty much the same as it was last week in a lot of ways, but we have seen the last 5 days obviously price action develop. So before I go to the lower time frame, looking at the daily time frame, we've had this bearish breaker structure. If we look at where that's originated from, it's originated either from this order block here, which has imbalance, which actually caused the move which broke structure, or you could see it as originating from this area up here, which is the extreme of the move. So in terms of what I'm expecting on Nzd Usd, based on this breaker structure, I am expecting price to sell and go further down. And from a daily perspective, I would anticipate that price will probably be coming back up either into this area or into this area before it then breaks structure again below this low. So what I'll be looking at going into next week from a daily perspective is for price to basically retrace further up into this area, and then when we do get into here, I'll look to sell off from this area, and if we then do go above that area, I'll still be looking for sells, and I'll be looking to sell out of this area here. So this is the daily high, and it's also the sell thesis invalidation. So for me, I'll be basically expecting sells on Nzd Usd until we break above this high. So while I would like to see price come up into one of these two areas from a daily perspective, what I'm not going to ignore is what's happening on the 4 hour. So on the 4 hour, we broke structure here previously, and we have this order block here, which is what actually caused this break structure. Now, what we've seen is that price has actually respected this order block and it's failed to go above it, and we're now seeing the bearish momentum kicking in and the sell volume coming into the market. So considering that, I do think it's definitely a possibility that price isn't going to come up to these daily areas and it's just going to now continue away from this 4 hour order block to then break structure again on the daily, moving away from this area here. So if we just look on the lower time frames, the 1 hour and 2 hour, what we can see is that price has broken structure to the low here, which has come from this area up here. And you could even consider that it's already touched back into that area and now it's just going to continue away from there. So for me, looking at it right now, we're respecting this 4 hour order block and we broke structure on the 2 hour to then go lower. So until we basically see a violation of this 2 hour structure now, I'm going to be expecting that price is just going to continue going bearish to then take us down to break this daily low. So yeah, Nzd Usd, I'm basically going to start the week by looking for sells following this reaction from the 4 hour order block. But if we do violate this area and we start to travel upwards, then it makes sense that we are just pulling back up into these daily order blocks, and I'll then look for sells from either this lower daily order block or the more extreme daily order block. Alright, so that's Nzd Usd. So AUD USD. So looking at this, we've got two bearish break structure consecutively, so that confirms that we're in a bearish trend on the daily. So considering that, we're going to be looking for sells on the daily. Now, the most recent break of structure was caused by this order block here, in my opinion. So for me, I've been waiting last week for price to retrace into this order block and then sell off away from there. So what we've actually seen last week on Thursday is price has come up and then rejected from this order block with this big wick here. So at this point now, for me, I'm expecting that price can just continue downwards to then break structure again on the daily, hopefully giving us this third break of structure to the low. So based on the fact that we've seen this wick rejection coming out of this supply order block, that's what I'm now expecting, is to see the third break coming through on the daily. Now, looking at the 4 hour, and I will just show on the 2 hour because I think it's clearer. So on the 2 hour, we've now broken structure, so we've reacted from here, breaking structure. So what I'm expecting at the start of next week is that we are just going to travel back up into this area, and then we can look to sell away from that area following the bearish bias on the daily. Now, what's also possible is that we won't retrace up and we will just see another break structure coming through, in which case there might be an opportunity to follow through with sells a bit lower down, possibly from either this area here or a new order block which may develop depending on where the break of structure next week actually comes from. So on AUD USD, we're just going to have to wait and see. See if we get the retrace up into here or if we break structure again. Either way, I'm definitely taking a sell bias this week on AU because we're reacting off this daily order block. So the only time, well, to be fair, I won't be looking for buys at all on AU considering what's happening on the daily, but it's worth being aware that the daily high is up here, so it's definitely possible that we will see price come higher before then finally breaking structure. So if we do see these areas aren't respected and price does continue up, then I'll still be happy to look for sells from either higher in this order block or from the extreme order block there. But we'll have to see what happens on AUD/USD. Either way, I'm only interested in sells this week. Alright, so moving on to EU now. So on EU, we've broken structure to the low on the daily, giving us a bearish bias on the daily, and that break of structure originated from this order block up here. So in terms of bearish bias, the invalidation point for that is this here, so that is our sell thesis invalidation point. Now, looking at what's happened last week, we have travelled up into this order block and then we've seen two wick rejections away from that order block. So at this point now, it does seem as if we are going to be following through with the bearish bias on the daily because we have failed to break above that and we've seen the liquidity grab above that area. So going into next week, the first thing I'm going to be looking at is sells to continue the move away from this daily order block. Now looking at the 1 hour, what I can see is following this liquidity grab here, we've broken structure to the low, and that break of structure which happened here originated from this area here. So for me, the first thing I'm going to be looking at is sells away from this 1 hour and I presume 2 hour point of interest here. So for me, that's the first thing I'm going to be looking at this week on the euro dollar. Now, with that said, we do have this bullish 4 hour structure which we can't ignore. So on the 4 hour, we saw the first bullish break of structure here, we've got our second bullish break of structure here, and we've got the mitigation there giving us that bullish order flow. So what is definitely possible is that we're not going to continue away from the daily like I was talking about. Instead, what could happen is we come down into this 4 hour bullish order block and then we start to see price buying up away from there. And also in favour of this thesis is the fact that bullish momentum is actually a lot stronger than the bearish momentum was, which broke the daily structure. So for me, really, with the euro dollar, there's two possibilities this week. So the first possibility is that we're just going to continue away from this daily order block here, and then we'll break structure again on the daily. And the second possibility is that we're going to travel down into this 4 hour demand order block, and then we're going to see the demand and the bullish volume start coming into the market, which will then just push price up away from there, invalidating the daily sell thesis. So Yeah, we'll have to see what happens really this week on euro dollar, but I think it's absolutely fine to buy out of this 4-hour demand order block, and I think it makes sense to sell as well, following away from this daily order block. So let's see what happens this week on EU, but that's my forecast. So pound dollar. Alright, so pound dollar, pretty interesting one at the minute. So on pound dollar, what we've got is this daily break of structure to the high. So that gives us our bullish intent from a daily perspective. So at some point, based on that, I am expecting that we will see this daily high broken because we have got that bullish intent on the daily. So really it's a question of when will this daily high be broken. Now for me, we've got this order block down here which caused this whole move, and that order block has clear imbalance on it. So looking at the chart at the minute, I think it makes a lot of sense for price to come down at least into this area to fill this imbalance, but more ideally into this extreme area, which is the actual order block which caused this whole bullish move. So for me, I do think that right now there's a good reason for price to come lower, and I do think that we're going to see those lower prices coming through on the pound dollar. Now, looking at the 4-hour, so the last couple of weeks, I was speaking about this order block here. So what we had from the high, we had a break structure, and then we've had a second break structure. We've had a break structure, we've had price come up to mitigate here, then we've had that second break structure. Now, we did get another break further down, but because the mitigation was here, this supply block here, that is where our order flow invalidation line lies. So basically, it makes sense that before going further down, price would come back up into the supply block here to mitigate orders in this area and follow the bearish order flow. Now, what we've seen this week just gone is price did come back up into this area, and basically after touching the open of this area, we've seen another break of structure, which I spoke about last week on the pound dollar. That left behind this 4-hour order block, so basically a supply area here, which caused this break of structure. Now, what we've seen is that price has actually wicked above this order block here, but just slightly deeper into this supply zone, which is still completely valid. So right now, considering what's going on, I am expecting that price is going to continue downwards, respecting this order block and respecting this supply area here. I do think it makes a lot of sense that we're going to see at least some bearish volume coming in since we've seen this liquidity grab now, and we've got all the supply up here from these two order blocks. So for me, this week on pound dollar, it's basically a case of looking for continuations for us to move away from these areas here, and we can try and capitalize on this move down. As a first target, I'd be looking at this liquidity down here, because I do think once we get going, we're pretty likely to be taking out this liquidity. But I do think it makes sense for us to retrace all the way down here into this bullish order block before we then potentially look for buys. But I don't think we'll reach the order block before the end of the week at the earliest. So whilst I would look for buys down here, I'm not really thinking about that right now. So yeah, pound dollar this week, we're basically looking for bearish continuations away from this area of supply. And in terms of specifically an area to sell from, I mean, I think probably the best option is to wait for another break of structure and then look to sell following that next break of structure on the 4-hour. So basically something like this. So we get the break structure on Monday, let's say, and then this supply block will be validated, and then on Tuesday we can look to sell out of this area here. So that's my expectation for the pound dollar, and let's see what happens this coming week. Alright, so euro pound now. So euro pound, the last few weeks I've been looking at sells out of this 2-day order block here. So that's because that's the area where this most recent break of structure came from, and we can see from the previous structure that we are in a bearish trend on euro pound. So considering that, I basically looked at the 4 hour and marked out two potential refinements on the 4 hour. So in terms of what caused that overall move, we basically had this area down here, which is a clear 4 hour order block, which caused that break. And then we've also got the wick up here. Now looking at what's happened with price this week, we have actually gone into this lower refinement, this 4 hour order block here, before then moving away. So considering that, I do think it's possible that we may just continue now to go down to then break the low on the daily. So while technically it would be nice to see price come higher into this, since we have tapped this refinement here and essentially mitigated quite a lot of the orders that would have been in this area, I do think it makes sense now for price to just continue going downwards. Also on the weekly, we've got all this liquidity here that the institutions will most likely be looking to take out. So I do think that we can just see price start to plummet down at any time, and especially if the euro dollar continues down as well. So that said though, what we do have on the 4 hour is we've broken structure to the high here, and that's come from this clear demand order block here. So for me, what I'm going to be expecting this week is price will come down into this demand order block, and then we do have the potential for a significant reaction from here, since we did see all that bullish volume kicking in last time we were in this area. So what I'm going to be looking at essentially is, firstly, we'll look for some type of buy move away from there, because I do think that with the amount of momentum that came out of that area, there's a good chance that we are going to see some bullish volume coming through from that area. And then after we react from here, I'll be looking to either continue bullish structure if we do get the bullish structure on the 1 hour, or if not, I'll be looking for price to retrace up into this area on the 1 hour, which caused the most recent 1 hour break structure, and then I'll look to continue the sells out of here, following through with that thesis on the daily time frame to then take us lower and take out that weekly liquidity that I've got marked here. So we'll have to see what happens with euro pound, but we've basically got this 4 hour demand zone here, and then we're also reacting off the daily area here, which is obviously the higher time frame, so in theory is more significant than the 4 hour. So it's absolutely valid for us to just crash through this 4 hour area, and that may well happen. So yeah, buys out of here and sells following the order flow coming away from the daily. Alright, now finally, pound yen. So pound yen on the daily, we broke the structure here, giving us that bullish bias on the daily. Now, I was looking before at either this area here to buy from to continue to break structure again on the daily, or this area down here. Now, for me, I would have preferred to see price come down here, and like I spoke about last week, we had that 12 hour supply block I was looking at for price to then come further down into this area. But what we saw was the 12 hour was violated, and we actually saw that continuation of the 4 hour point of interest that I marked last week to then take price higher. So considering now that on the 4 hour we do seem to just be in this bullish structure and bullish order flow, for me I'm really thinking that price may just continue bullish now, having touched into this daily base here. So looking at a 4 hour right now, we've got the most recent break structure and we got a break structure before that. Now for me, if we break below this low here, then at that point I will be taking a bearish bias on the pound yen. But until that point, it's perfectly valid for us to just continue upwards. Now, the first area that I would look to buy from, which we're already inside of, is this area here, and that's because this is the order block which caused the most recent break structure. But that said, we've got a lot of bearish momentum in this candle here, so for me, I would be quite surprised if this order block holds, just because of how much bearish volumes come through that candle. So considering that, and we've got liquidity under here, I think if we are going to be looking for buys, I do think it's going to make more sense to look for buys out of this area here, That area also mitigated the last order block from last week, so this is where the order flow invalidation as well as the structure invalidation is. So for me this week, whilst this is valid, I'm not too interested in it. I'm more going to be looking for buys out of this area down here. So starting the week, I'll be anticipating price coming into this area, and then we can look for buys out of there. But with that said, and what I'm definitely not going to ignore is for price to essentially come down here, unless we see it wicking and then move back out, most likely we're going to see a close below this low when we do come down into this area. So that will give us a bearish break structure, which will signal the possibility that we're going to go further down with price. So considering that we'll most likely get a bearish break structure below this low, what that does signal is bearish intent, and that will leave behind this order block here for sells. So whilst I do think that this is a solid demand area to look for buys, and we could just see price break structure again following a reaction from this area, I will be open to the fact that we're also going to have this bearish intent, and what we could see is that after price reacts off here, it'll travel up into this area and then react off there for sells. So if that does happen, that could be a good opportunity for us to then take price all the way into this daily bearish order block, which of course lines up with the pound dollar daily bearish order block. So for me, I'm probably not going to really bother buying out of this area this week. I'll be looking for buys from this area here, and then I'll be looking for sells out of this area here if we do see that break structure coming through. That said though, this is still a valid area for buys, so if you guys do see your entry patterns coming out of this area, then by all means take the buys. Alright guys, so that's it for the forecast this week. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you got any questions or any feedback. And if you do enjoy these videos, then please subscribe to the channel guys, because I really appreciate it. And I do put time in each week to create these forecasts for you guys. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. Hope you all have a good trading week and trade with your plan and trade safe. Cheers guys.